Bindi is doing so much better now.
Mm.
So things like a lot of travel are a bit challenging for her at the moment. And so she'll be.
For nearly 2 decades, the Irwin name has stood for courage in the face of danger, for a family that wrestled crocodiles and waded into crisis without flinching. But this year, at the very event created to honor their late father's memory, one chair at the family table sat empty for the second year running. There was no crocodile to blame, no wild animal to wrangle. The fight this time was happening quietly, inside Bindi Irwin's own body, and it had been going on for far longer than most people realized. Bindi grew up in front of cameras, following her father Steve Irwin, the beloved crocodile hunter, through the enclosures of Australia Zoo long before she could read. When Steve was killed by a stingray barb in September 2006, Bindi was only 8 years old, and Robert was barely a toddler. Terri was left as a single parent tasked with raising 2 young children while also keeping a wildlife park, a television legacy, and a global conservation mission alive. In the years since, the family has expanded Australia Zoo, built the Wildlife Warriors charity, and turned Steve's name into a permanent fixture of the conservation world, all while staying almost constantly in the public eye. To the outside world, the Irwins have always looked unbreakable, a family that could face down apex predators without a flicker of fear. What the family has only recently been willing to discuss in real detail is that, behind all of that composure, Bindi has spent more than a decade fighting a private, physically brutal battle that has nothing to do with wildlife at all. In March 2023, Bindi shared on Instagram that she had been diagnosed with endometriosis, a chronic condition in which tissue similar to the lining of the uterus grows outside it, causing inflammation, severe pelvic pain, fatigue, and a long list of other debilitating symptoms. She revealed that she had actually been searching for answers for roughly 10 years before doctors finally understood what was happening to her. Like so many women with endometriosis, she has described spending years being told her pain was simply a normal part of being a woman, an explanation that left her feeling dismissed even as her condition kept getting worse and began interfering with basic parts of daily life. That first diagnosis came after surgery in New York with endometriosis specialist Dr. Tamer Sekin, who removed 37 lesions along with a cyst that had fused to her ovary. For Bindi, finally having a name for her pain, and proof that it was real, was its own kind of relief, even though surgery could not promise the disease would not return. Endometriosis is a disease with no permanent cure, only management, and Bindi has since become candid about how exhausting it is to live with a condition that can quietly rebuild itself even after major surgery. Endometriosis is notoriously difficult to fully resolve, and for Bindi, it did come back. In the spring of 2025, right around the time of that year's Steve Irwin Gala, her symptoms escalated sharply. What began as worsening pain turned into a medical emergency when her appendix ruptured. She underwent surgery again with Dr. Sekin, this time to remove her appendix along with 14 newly discovered endometriosis lesions, and to repair a hernia that had developed from childbirth years earlier. 2 weeks afterward, she posted an update from her recovery, describing endometriosis as a disease that is nothing short of crippling, and promising to keep raising awareness for women who live with the same relentless pain. Robert and Bindi's husband, Chandler Powell, both spoke publicly at the time about how much strength she had shown throughout the ordeal. By August 2025, Bindi shared a fuller accounting of just how extensive her medical fight had been. Across her 2 rounds of surgery, doctors had ultimately removed more than 50 endometriosis lesions from her body, along with the chocolate cyst, her appendix, and the hernia repair. She wrote that she could finally say she was genuinely healing, and that it was time for open, honest conversations about a disease that so often gets minimized. She has continued to use her platform to reach other women who feel dismissed by doctors, telling her followers that no one deserves to suffer in silence and that she believes them. That message has resonated far beyond her own fanbase, connecting with a much wider community of women who have gone through similarly long, frustrating searches for a diagnosis. Her advocacy has since been recognized by the Endometriosis Foundation of America, which honored her as the first international recipient of its Blossom Award, a milestone that gave her years of quiet suffering a very public, very meaningful purpose. Bindi has also spoken about how isolating chronic illness can feel, even inside a large and supportive family. In interviews since her diagnosis, she has described the emotional toll of years spent not knowing what was wrong with her, being repeatedly told nothing was seriously amiss, while her symptoms continued to interfere with her ability to work, travel, and simply function day to day. That combination of physical pain and emotional dismissal is common among people with endometriosis, and it is part of why Bindi has chosen to keep sharing updates rather than disappear from public view entirely. Even while managing an illness that limits how much she can travel or appear on camera, she has continued releasing candid posts about her recovery, turning what could have remained a private struggle into a resource for other women searching for their own answers. Even with real progress, healing from a condition this invasive does not happen on a fixed schedule, and that reality became visible again this May, when the Irwins gathered in Las Vegas for the third annual Steve Irwin Gala at the Bellagio. The ballroom was filled with longtime supporters, conservation donors, and even ambassador animals brought in to recreate a piece of the Australian outback, but for the second consecutive year, Bindi was not there. Reporters on the red carpet immediately asked Terri and Robert where she was, and Terri's answer was gentle but honest. Bindi was doing so much better, but travel of that length was still genuinely difficult for her while she continued recovering. She added, half joking but pointed, that it was actually less taxing for Bindi to stay home in Australia feeding crocodiles than to make the trip to Las Vegas. Terri promised that Bindi would be back at the gala the following year, and made clear that although she couldn't be physically present, the family felt her there with them in spirit. Robert has quietly stepped into a bigger leadership role at Australia Zoo whenever the rest of the family travels for events like the gala, overseeing the day-to-day work of running a wildlife park at that scale so that Bindi does not feel pressure to push herself before she is ready. Terri, for her part, has tried to strike a careful balance in how the family talks about Bindi's health, offering enough honesty to reassure worried fans without turning her daughter's recovery into a public spectacle. Choosing to keep Bindi home rather than have her fly across the world for a single night reflects a family that has learned, sometimes the hard way, that healing needs boundaries as much as it needs love. That protectiveness has been consistent since Bindi first went public with her diagnosis, but it has clearly deepened since her 2025 emergency surgery. Chandler Powell has been a steady presence throughout her recovery, and Terri and Robert have both used their own platforms to remind fans that Bindi's health always comes first, even if that means missing high-profile events built around the family name. It is a notable shift for a family whose entire public identity was built on showing up, on being present at every rescue and every camera-ready moment. Choosing absence, and explaining that choice honestly instead of quietly hoping no one would notice, has arguably become one of the more mature turns in how the Irwins now handle their life in the spotlight. That same instinct toward openness has shown up in an entirely different arena this year, the ballroom of Dancing with the Stars. Bindi actually has history with the show first, winning season 21 back in 2015 with professional partner Derek Hoff, a victory that came to feel like an early symbol of her resilience even before her health struggles became public. A decade later, in the fall of 2025, it was Robert's turn, competing on season 34 with partner Whitney Carson. One of the season's most talked about moments came on dedication night, when Robert chose to honor Terri with a routine set to You'll Be in My Heart, reflecting on how she raised him and Bindi largely on her own after losing Steve, all while keeping their father's conservation work alive. When Terri joined him on the ballroom floor afterward for an embrace, the moment moved both the judges and the studio audience to tears, and it captured something the family rarely puts into words: the quiet cost Terri has carried since 2006, and the gratitude her children feel for how she held everything together. Robert's own path to the finale was not an easy one. In the final stretch of the competition, after 11 weeks of intense, near-daily rehearsals, he developed a painful rib injury that made even breathing difficult, forcing Carson to rework parts of their choreography on short notice so he could keep competing safely. He pushed through anyway, telling interviewers afterward that the adrenaline of performing carried him past the pain until the show was over. His freestyle finale became an emotional tribute to his father, and he later admitted he had wished more than anything that Steve could have been there to see it. Judges praised him not just for his technical growth over the season but for the sincerity he brought to every performance, with more than one commenting that they could feel Steve's presence in the ballroom. When the trophy was announced, Robert became the youngest male champion in the show's history, and with his win, he and Bindi became the first siblings to each claim a Dancing with the Stars Mirrorball trophy, exactly a decade apart. Terri, Bindi, and Bindi's 5-year-old daughter, Grace Warrior, watched from the audience as he took the win, a moment that folded generations of the family's grief and joy into a single night. In the days that followed, Robert spoke about how much it meant to share the win with his dance partner, and Terri posted her own tribute online thanking Carson for looking out for her son throughout the competition, describing the experience with the same warmth and humor that has become one of her trademarks. That blend of grief and joy has become something close to a philosophy for the Irwins as they approach the 20th anniversary of Steve's death. Robert has spoken about feeling his father's presence during conservation work in the outback, a reminder that Steve's legacy lives on not just in old footage but in the daily work still happening at Australia Zoo. Terri has talked about the importance of letting herself feel both sorrow and happiness rather than pushing grief aside, a mindset that seems to shape how the family has chosen to handle Bindi's illness as well, acknowledging the pain honestly, without letting it define the whole story. The approaching 20th anniversary of Steve's death has clearly shaped how the family is choosing to talk about all of this. Robert has spoken about feeling connected to his father during conservation work out in the Australian bush, describing moments where Steve's presence feels close even though he has only ever known him through old footage and family stories. Bindi, who has clearer first-hand memories of their father, carries a different kind of grief, and the two siblings have both said that being honest about those differences has helped fans connect more deeply with their story. Terri has spoken about the importance of letting herself feel both sorrow and happiness rather than pushing grief aside, a mindset that seems to shape how the family has chosen to handle Bindi's illness as well, acknowledging the pain honestly, without letting it define the whole story or overshadow the progress being made. For now, the Irwins are simply taking it one season at a time. Bindi continues her recovery from home in Australia, staying close to Grace and to the wildlife work that has always grounded her, while Terri and Robert keep the public-facing side of the family's mission moving forward, from the zoo's daily operations to the next Wildlife Warriors fundraiser. Terri has said she expects Bindi to gradually work her way back to fuller participation in events like the gala, and there is no reason to think that promise is anything but genuine, even if the exact timeline remains uncertain. What the family has made clear through all of this is that they are no longer interested in projecting an image of effortless strength. They would rather tell the truth, that recovery is slow, that setbacks happen, and that even a family famous for standing eye to eye with crocodiles needs patience, privacy, and each other to get through the hardest parts. Grace Warrior is growing up watching that honesty play out in real time, inheriting not just a love of wildlife but a family model for facing hardship without pretending it isn't there. That kind of openness, more than any single headline about surgeries or missed events, is probably the most meaningful thing the Irwins have shared with the world this year.